Welcome. My name is Markus Wesaw, and today I'd like to do a toolbox talk on overhead fallen objects. As always, my contact information is listed clearly on the screen, so feel free to call me or email me with questions or concerns regarding this particular video presentation. With that, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to briefly go over an old adage. Maybe it's a cliche, but I like it in terms of health and safety because I think it's very important, and that I might make a point with using a real life case study, if you will, to communicate something that is important and that we don't want to happen again, and that is those who do not learn from the past are doomed to repeat it. So what I'd like to do with that is communicate an event that happened in November 2014 regarding overhead fallen objects and a fatality in New Jersey. So the aim of this video presentation is to communicate the various dangers of overhead fallen objects and to present a very recent event where an individual perished because there was an accident. So let's go over the specifics of this New Jersey fatality. We had a 50-story building under construction, and another individual working somewhere in that vicinity, obviously well above the ground, had a tape measure, and that tape measure weighed about 1 pound. The tape measure was dropped. It fell and it struck a man in the head, I believe, and the person didn't die immediately, but died later in a hospital environment. So what I'd like to do is I've put together a link here, and I'm going to read what happened from the article at Fox News, and I'll also put this link in a place where you can get it in the description if you'd like to look at it yourself. So from this article, I'll go ahead and read, and then we'll have a little discussion about this article. A man delivering drywall to a New Jersey construction site was killed Monday when a tape measure fell 50 stories, striking him on the head, authorities said. The 1 pound tape measure became dislodged from the belt of a worker on the 50th floor and struck construction equipment about 10 to 15 feet from the ground, according to Carly Baldwin, a spokeswoman for New Jersey City Department of Public Safety. It then ricocheted and struck Gary Anderson, 58, who had just stopped to speak with another worker who was in a pickup truck just before 9 a.m. in the city's downtown section. Anderson, of Somerdale, New Jersey, was taken to a hospital where he died shortly before 10 a.m. Anderson was not wearing a hard hat, but had one in his truck at the time, according to the police report. He was a very good worker, an employee of New York-based trucking company George Hildebrandt told the New York Post. He's been with us for a long time. A person who picked up the phone at Anderson's home said it was a difficult time, declining further comment. Workers at the construction site were temporarily cleared out after the accident, but resumed their jobs at the site later in the afternoon. The Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration is investigating the incident, the Post reports. A former construction worker near the site told the newspaper, "You don't work in this environment without a hard hat." He paid the price, the man said sadly. You gotta have it. A police report listed Anderson as working for Charlotte, North Carolina-based National Gypsum. A spokeswoman for the company said he was delivering National Gypsum's product at the time of the accident, but was employed by an independent trucking company. Officials said 2 50-story residential towers and an attached hotel are being built at the site of the accident. So let's look at preventative measures. We've reviewed the newspaper article or the online article. I think it was published in different media environments. But let's look at some preventative measures for our toolbox talk on overhead fallen objects. Training on personal protective equipment requirements on site. So on a construction site, should there be some kind of orientation, some kind of training prior to going onto the site? Probably. Are there signs that we could erect? Are there policies? Okay. What other types of training could we implement? Another important thing to consider is working at heights presents quite a challenge for both workers above using tools and below, because we always have the possibility of a tool falling. Now, there are a lot of ways we can prevent tools from falling at heights when work is being conducted above. For example, there are a wide array of tool lanyards available by many companies that can be easily affixed to a tool. If the tool should be dropped, the tool lanyard would easily catch that tool and prevent the tool from falling on anybody beneath that employee working with it. Safety nets, a similar alternative. Obviously, a little bit more goes into erecting a safety net, but I'll leave that for another discussion. We could use exclusion or controlled access zones, barricades, signs and placards for overhead work or men working above are always important as well. I know that a lot of companies do these already, but we call them JSAs or PTPs, but that stands for Job Safety Analyses or Pre-Task Plans. And then finally, I think that a good preventative measure for preventing these kind of accidents from occurring is appropriate subcontractor management. Larger construction companies often fail to effectively address subcontractors. They have every good measure that you can think of a lot of times in place for their very own employees. But subcontractors are often left unchecked, and there are a lot of assumptions made by middle to upper management teams with respect to the safety of subcontractors. Now, just so you know, the general rule of thumb, speaking from a safety perspective, is that subcontractors are to be treated and included as if they were employees of a general contractor, which means essentially that subcontractor employees would attend the safety meetings, they would attend the same site orientations, they would have the same training requirements as employees of a general contractor. But keep that in mind. And now I'd like to do a quick review. And I've done some other toolbox talks on this, so let's just review the Focus 4 from OSHA. And again, if you're unfamiliar with the OSHA Focus 4, OSHA has come up with 4 categories that are often associated with fatalities. Number 1 is obviously falls. Falls meaning slips, trips, and falls. Employee falls from heights, all kinds of falls. Falls from ladders, falls from stairs. The list goes on and on, but it's just one broad category. That's number 1. Number 2 is electrocution, involving electrical components and equipment. That one's a little self-explanatory. Then we have our caught in or caught between hazards, which literally means that an individual's hand or body part or their whole body was caught in something and forced against another object, whether that's stationary or movable. We don't know, but that's what we mean by that. And finally, we have struck by hazards, which is literally what we are talking about here. We had an overhead fallen object, which was a tape measure, fall, ricochet, and then strike another employee in the head. Those kind of instances would all be under the broad category of struck by hazards. So here again, we have a fatality, and OSHA comes up absolutely correct. The OSHA Focus 4 has been around for years and years and years. So what does that mean? We've known about these kind of hazards in construction for a while, and obviously we need to take extreme measures to make sure that we abate, eliminate, or at least reduce in some way these kind of hazards in the construction environment. I have some other thoughts that I'd like to introduce into this discussion on how overhead fallen objects occur, what we can do to supplement our endeavor to prevent injuries and accidents like the one that occurred here in New Jersey. Number one, try to create a safety culture within your organization. Okay? And what that means is think about safety as an everyday ongoing process. Think about involving management teams and getting their commitment, and think about on the lowest possible levels, getting everybody to commit to safe work practices, to using tool lanyards, to using safety nets, and help each other stay on board with this kind of initiative. It's very important that we do that. Safety manuals. Review the safety manuals that your companies have available to you. Review the safety manuals of your subcontractors and have policies and procedures in place, not only to outline the general scope of your work, but also that address all kinds of hazards. And surprise, surprise, you're going to hear me say this over and over again, but you really need to have safety policies and procedures that thoroughly address the focus 4 hazards that I just mentioned to you, including overhead fallen objects, which again is a struck by hazard. I know that a lot of accidents and injuries occur because in construction, there's a lot of pressure to get the job done. That's important to not succumb to that pressure. Find a good, safe pace to work and don't try to rush things. And I know that many of you are going to laugh at that, and I know that it's very challenging, but that's what has to happen if we're going to keep people safe and avoid these very preventable accidents. Okay? Now, do we just say safety's first, or do we mean be safe, keep your mouth shut? I've heard this many times before. A good construction hand is going to keep his mouth shut and do his job. Okay? And I think that kind of mentality is ingrained in a lot of people's work ethic. And as a result, they don't really want to do anything but their job. Safety is not my job. Safety is somebody else's responsibility. Okay? We need to move away from that mentality and have a more active workforce that's going to help identify and correct these kinds of problems. Now, another question that I have for you involves, is safety common sense? Nope. Common sense is what I call a superpower. It's something that the Incredible Hulk, Superman, Batman, these comic action figures and these superstars might have, these things you might find out of a DC comic book or Marvel comic book. Safety is not common sense. Safety is very, very complex. It entails all the sciences, all the disciplines. It entails a great wide array of problem solving and solutions, not to mention the ever-growing complex regulatory environment. Okay, so is safety common sense? No. But I'll tell you what is common sense. Hazard recognition is common sense. Can we look at things that could hurt us and identify them as hazards? For example, if it's winter and we had some melting ice and now it's cold again the next day, we might have a slippery working surface here. You might have some ice accumulated on the streets, on the sidewalks. We might be able to say, wow, that's really, really slippery. We better put some salt down and maybe some other things like sand, salt, or something like that to identify and not only identify, but to remove and abate the hazard. Okay, so think about these kind of things. Safety is not common sense, but hazard recognition is. Okay, common sense, again, is a superpower. So as we kind of go forward here with our overhead fallen objects discussion, is this particular accident, this fatality, preventable? Absolutely, yes it is. Is it something that could have been prevented by innumerable ways? Yes. Okay. If we could use tool lanyards, for example, while working overhead, that would work. Safety nets to protect and collect objects that could possibly fall from a higher level. We could capture it on a lower level and prevent them from falling and possibly injuring or killing workers. That's another kind of initiative we could take. The other is, why wasn't this individual wearing a hard hat? Okay. It was probably a really quick delivery of goods or some kind of product, and then the individual was planning on leaving. So sometimes we can get complacent in how we protect ourselves. Oh, you know what? I don't need to put on my fall protection harness because I'm only going to climb this height of 10 feet. I'm going to go up there, do something really quickly, and then come down. Okay. So we get in this kind of mentality as well. And I'm going to go back to that safety culture, that way you do your work, and then that pressure to get the job done. So all of these are different kind of factors that all play into this. Now, I have had some debate amongst other individuals about this particular incident, and some people say, well, we don't know for sure if the individual would have been wearing his hard hat, if that person would have lived or not. We don't know that. I don't want to speculate. But whether or not the hard hat played a big factor in saving this life or not, we can agree that if this person would have been wearing his hard hat, we would have a significant chance of not having a fatality, but just a serious injury. So the issue goes beyond wearing personal protective equipment, of course, but I do want to make that distinguishing remark that we don't know for sure. I don't want to speculate because that's too much of a conversation, I think, for our purposes here. But what I will say is that this is an issue that was compounded and not really addressed on a wide scale. So I hope that as you move forward and you're working on a construction site or any other type of environment, if you see people working above you, remember that there's kind of a cone of influence, okay, of how overhead fallen objects fall. And what I want you to be keenly aware of is that if you see people working, okay, above you, objects don't necessarily fall straight down. They can fall at angles and they can fall in different places that are really not so predictable. And I want you to be very cautious of that. So if your organization has people working above heights, use tool lanyards, implement safety nets, use barricades, signs, placards, use all of those things that we just talked about to prevent tools and other objects from falling on workers below. It is very important. We've talked about it in the OSHA Focus 4 and the OSHA 10-hour and 30-hour construction courses for years and years and years. And I think it's time we start trying to get better, and I think it's time that we really focus on injury prevention by looking at struck-by hazards and overhead fallen objects. Again, my name is Markus Wesaw. I hope you enjoyed this Toolbox talk. I hope that this real-life case study resonates with you in your organization. If you would like to contact me, again, here is my information and our website information. Look forward to creating more Toolbox Talk meetings and video presentations for you. And I hope you have a great day. Thank you for listening in,